insight yet. He doesn't have a solution yet, but he recognizes the problem.
Ripples on a river distort reflected sunlight.
Siddhartha could not expect help from the religion of the time, the ancient Vedic religion, steeped in ceremony and ritual.
3 men wearing scarves sit on the shore by a fire. They pour oil into the flames at intervals.
Some of its rituals still live on in ceremonies conducted by Hindu priests, who chant Vedic formulas more than 2,500 years old.
Subtitles appear as Hindu priest Satyendra Kunar Partek speaks. This ritual is from long ago, when civilization was first developed here. Through this chanting, we worship our gods and the planets in order to provide inner peace to all living creatures. The men stand. Satyendra Kunar Partek waves a tray holding a small flame as he sings.
For centuries, the Vedic rituals had commanded respect for the gods and inspired conviction. But by Siddhartha's time, the rituals no longer spoke to the spiritual needs of many Indians, leaving a spiritual vacuum and a sense of foreboding.
Kevin Trainer, University of Vermont.
The gods become less important than the rituals themselves. It's a period of great unrest. It's a period of social upheaval, social change.
Cities were growing, generating new wealth and spiritual hunger. As one ancient voice cried out in despair, "The oceans have dried up, mountains have crumbled, the pole star is shaken, the earth founders, the gods perish. I'm like a frog in a dry well."
A lot of people aren't satisfied with the religion that they grew up in. And when Prince Siddhartha decides to give up his life, he's doing something that lots of other people were doing.
Siddhartha joined thousands of searchers like himself, renunciants, men and even a few women who had renounced the world, embracing poverty and celibacy, living on the edge, just as spiritual seekers still do in India today.
Present day, a wild bearded man gazes out across an arid plain dotted with rocks and scrub. Flags fly over a ramshackle camp of cloth shelters draped over sticks.
Now, at this time in India, there are lots of renunciants out there. It's a flourishing renunciant tradition. There are many different people who have given everything up and practice austerities and meditate in order to escape from the cycle of death and rebirth. The notion of reincarnation is something that's part of Indian culture, part of Indian civilization, part of Indian religion that was there long before the Buddha. And it was in a sense, the problem that the Buddha faced.
Suffering didn't begin at birth and finish with death. Suffering was endless. Unless it was possible to find a way out, become enlightened, become a Buddha.
3 creatures form a circle, each devouring the other's tail.
There was a sense of death not being final, but of death leading inexorably to rebirth.
Mark Epstein, psychiatrist and author.
Suffering beings bound to the wheel of death and rebirth.
A ring around the creatures depicts 2 cycles, a man ascending toward godliness and descending toward darkness.
It is said that Siddhartha had lived many lives before this one.
A cat becomes an elephant.
As countless animals.
The elephant yields a butterfly, the butterfly many butterflies, the many become one man.
Innumerable human beings.
The man becomes a woman, the woman a farmer, the farmer a deity floating in the air and playing a flute.
And even gods. Across 4 incalculable ages, the sacred texts say, and many eons.
A hunter becomes a scorpion.
Experiencing life in all its different forms.
A monkey becomes a cow, a dog, and a herder. His Holiness the Dalai Lama interviews.
Siddhartha's previous lives, many eons, sometimes as a human being, sometimes as an animal, but then gradually, you see his practice becoming more higher and higher and deeper, deeper.
A beetle becomes a lizard, then a peacock. Astrophysicist Trinh Xuyen Tuan.
The idea is from life to life to progress more and more toward the enlightenment and become wiser and wiser.
A donkey plants its rear as a herder tugs at its lead.
Some beings will stubbornly insist on their ignorance and their egotism, and they will charge ahead, grabbing and eating what they can in front of themselves and being dissatisfied, but thinking that the next bite will do it. And they will die and be reborn, die and be reborn infinite times.
Robert Tenzin Thurman, Columbia University.
It could take them, billion lifetimes if they're very stubborn,
The circular artwork spins, and the creatures at center chase each other.
And becoming a Buddha, becoming enlightened, is the only way of getting out of the continual cycle of death and rebirth. Now, rebirth here isn't the popular notion that, my past life I was Cleopatra floating down the Nile, or
D. Max Mormon, Barnard College.
It's as if every life is going through junior high school again, over and over and over.
In the woods, a bird perches on a leafless branch, then takes flight. A monkey peeks around a tree trunk.
With the authority of the priests worn thin and wisdom seekers like Siddhartha roaming the countryside, holy men emerged, teaching their own spiritual disciplines.
In a painting, a disciple kneels and bows toward a gray-bearded elder. Then Siddhartha looks up to a shaven-headed guru.
Siddhartha apprenticed himself to one of them, a celebrated guru who taught that true knowledge could never come from ritual practice alone. It was necessary to look within. You may stay here with me, the guru told him. A wise person can soon dwell in his teacher's knowledge and experience it directly for himself. Siddhartha set himself to learn the rigorous practices the guru prescribed.
The teachers of the time are already teaching forms of yoga and meditation, teaching that the self-reflective capacity of the mind can be put to use to tame the mind, to tame the passions. That was already established in India. And there were probably so many schools of yoga and meditation in those days, just as there are now.
Present day, a yogi closes his eyes as he chants on a beach. Later, he stands on a blanket and stretches. He's bare-chested and wears a necklace and diaper-like loincloth. Subtitles: Yoga is not only for the body, although it benefits the body in many ways. He sits, touching his toes. Then he raises his arms over his head. Words read Yogiraj Rakesh Pandey. The ultimate goal of yoga is to achieve deep meditation. He sits cross-legged, palms in his lap facing upward. It does not come easily or quickly. It comes by practice. He pumps his belly in and out, making waves.
Although yoga appears to focus on controlling the body, it is in fact an ancient spiritual discipline, a form of meditation, harnessing the energies of the body to tame the mind.
Cross-legged, he weaves his arms behind his back to grab opposite toes. Then he leans forward and presses his forehead to the ground.
Some yogis learn to sit without moving for hours, breathing more and more slowly until they seem to be barely breathing at all.
The Yogiraj meditates with arms resting on his knees, palms up.
All kinds of trance states are possible through meditation. If you hold the mind, if you concentrate the mind on a single object, be it a word or a candle flame or a sound, it's possible to transport the mind into all kinds of interesting places.
As the sun hangs low over buildings crowded on a distant shoreline, the yogi sits motionless on the beach in the foreground.
The person who was to become the Buddha was very good at all of those practices. He was a super student, doing these practices, taking them to their limit, and no matter what he did in these practices, he was still stuck in the pain that he set out with.
He ascends to these very rarefied states of consciousness, but it's not permanent. And it does not bring penetrating truth into the nature of reality. So these become a temporary escape from the problem of existence, but they don't solve the problem.
Nighttime, the yogi stands on the shoreline and chants. Lights from the nearby city streak across the water.
Siddhartha apprenticed himself to another popular guru, but the results were the same. The thought occurred to me, he said later, this practice does not lead to direct knowledge, to deeper awareness. Disenchanted, he left this master too.
In a painting, Siddhartha wears his black hair in a tight bundle atop his head. Fade to a twilit forest.
Siddhartha continued to drift south, still searching for the answer to his questions. Why do human beings suffer? Is there any escape?
He's trying and trying and searching, and he already experienced extreme luxury, so now he tries extreme deprivation.
A lone leafless tree towers over a field.
Among the renunciants, asceticism was a common spiritual practice, punishing the body as a way to attain serenity and wisdom. Siddhartha fell in with 5 other ascetics, and soon was outdoing them in mortifying the flesh, subjecting his body to extremes of hardship and pain.
In a painting, a rail-thin, white-bearded ascetic hangs upside down from ropes tied to a tree limb. Others hold poses. A close-up shows deep creases on an ascetic's forehead. His eyes droop.
The body represents a fundamental problem. Old age brings a decrepitude to the body. Sickness brings pain and suffering to the body. And death is ultimately the cessation of the functioning of the body. So there was a sense that if you could punish the body sufficiently, you could escape its influence. You could transcend some of the limitations that the body seemed to impose.
Poet Jane Hirschfield.
The ascetic pursues the truth by taking the requirements of survival down to the absolute minimum possible. Barely enough food to stay alive, no protection from the elements, no heat. Sit in the cold, sit in the rain, meditate fiercely for all the hours of awakening.
WS Merwin.
Renunciation of shedding everything, of dying, the feeling that one is dying to one's life as it was, is essential to being reborn as someone who sees.
Present day, a skeletal ascetic joins his palms in front of a fire. He wears a white beard and turban.
Ascetics can still be seen in India, firm in the belief that by subduing the flesh, they can gain spiritual power.
The man Bikapuri Shankapir interviews. What is the truth? When you eat once every 24 hours, every second tells you what the truth is. I had a home and I left it when I was 16. I don't desire material things. I am able to follow my spiritual path by letting go of greed. He blinks and stares into the fire.
Emaciated, exhausted, Siddhartha punished himself for 6 years, trying to put an end to the cravings that beset him.
He tortures himself, trying to destroy anything within himself that he sees as bad. The spiritual traditions of that time said you can be liberated if you eliminate everything that's human, everything that's coarse and vulgar, every bit of anger, every bit of desire. If you, if you wipe that out with force of will, then you can go into some kind of transcendental state. And the Buddha tried all that, and he became, the most anorectic of the anorectic ascetics. He was eating 1 grain of rice per day. He was drinking his own urine. He was standing on 1 foot. He was sleeping on nails. He did it all to the utmost.
In a statue of the emaciated Siddhartha, blood vessels stand out over exposed ribs. His eyes are sunken deep into an angular alien face.
My body slowly became extremely emaciated, Siddhartha said. My limbs became like the jointed segments of vine or bamboo stems. My spine stood out like a string of beads. My ribs jutted out like the jutting rafters of an old abandoned building. The gleam of my eyes appeared to be sunk deep in my eye sockets, like the gleam of water deep in a well. My scalp shriveled and withered like a green bitter gourd, shriveled and withered in the heat and wind.
More vessels stand out on his forehead like branches of a river. Venerable Mattaya Sakyaputta.
What he was trying to do was pushing his body to the most extreme that he could. But then he realized that from that, he cannot gain what he wants. Trying to torture the body becomes too much. The whole attention is given to the body, nothing else.
He surrendered himself completely to the hard training that he was given. And what he discovered, having tried this completely for many years, was that he had not answered his question. It hadn't worked. He was on the verge of death, dying, unawakened, when he remembered something.
In another statue, his sunken eyes look upward. Animated hills fly by.
He remembered a day when he was young and sat by the river with his father, and the perfection of the world as it was simply gave itself to him.
Rows of crops stripe the hills. A group of dancing women grows closer.
Years before, when Siddhartha was a small boy, his father, the king, had taken him to a spring planting festival.
The 8 dancers step and twirl in unison.
While he watched the ceremonial dancing, he looked down at the grass.
Ants scurry around. An underground view shows the tunnels of their colony.
He thought about the insects and their eggs.
Eggs lie buried next to the tunnels.
Destroyed as the field was planted. He was overwhelmed with sadness.
A spiral pattern flows across the earth. The ants follow it like a path.
One great taproot of Buddhism is compassion, which is the deep affection that we feel for everything because we're all in it together. Be it other human beings, other animals, the planet as a whole, the creatures of this planet, the trees and rivers of this planet. Everything is connected.
The spiral grows and sprouts offshoots like roots. The mass leads above ground to a tree, whose spiraling branches mimic the roots. A figure sits at the tree's base.
It was a beautiful day. His mind drifted.
White clouds float through the sky.
As if by instinct, he crossed his legs in the yoga pose of meditation. And the natural world paid him homage.
The white figure sits motionless.
As the sun moved through the sky, the shadows shifted. But the shadow of the rose apple tree where he sat remained still. He felt a sense of pure joy.
Mark Epstein, psychiatrist and author.
The joy that he found is in the world that is already broken. It's in this transitory world that we're all a part of. And the fabric of this world, despite the fact that it can seem so horrible, the underlying fabric of this world actually is that joy that he recovered. That was his great insight. But, he says, I can't sustain a feeling of joy like this if I don't take any food, so I'd better eat something. And then at that moment, a village maiden mysteriously appears carrying a bowl of rice porridge.
And she said to him, "Here, eat."
In a painting, the woman kneels as she offers.
That moment of generosity and release, when he accepted the rice, was a decision towards life. It was what in the Christian tradition might be called grace, that you cannot do it completely on your own. And in Christianity, the grace comes from the divine. In the story of the Buddha, the grace comes from the ordinary kind heart of a girl who sees somebody starving and says, "Eat."
And there's something beautiful. Whenever I remember that story, it makes me so happy because I see the heart of Buddha as the person he was, like the Siddhartha.
A painting finds the young prince at the palace.
This dish was the dish he used to be fed by his stepmother, rice pudding. He was missing that so much. And then he remembered maybe further and further, and he remembered about his wife, about his son, and the deepest emotions that he had suppressed. They overpowered. They came up. They were still there. He had a feeling of missing. He had a feeling of seeing his son, and a feeling of being near his loved ones. They were so powerful. Oh, this must have soaked his whole entire being.
He was actually an utter failure. He had been clinging to the path of asceticism, and when he took the food, what followed was a return of his original question. Life is painful. Life involves change. This is still a problem. The problem didn't disappear.
A field stretches away to a foggy forest.
It wasn't long before the ascetics who had been Siddhartha's companions found him eating and turned away in disgust. Siddhartha loves luxury, they said. He has forsaken his spiritual practice. He has become extravagant.
D. Max Mormon, Barnard College.
But the man who will become the Buddha realizes that extreme deprivation isn't the way to go. We can live as normal human beings. We can eat and drink. And in fact, we kind of need to eat and drink and be normal human beings in order to break through, in order to attain the kind of realization that he was looking for.
The emaciated ascetic Siddhartha statue lies in shadows.
Siddhartha had put his faith in 2 gurus. They hadn't helped him. He'd punished his mind and body. That had almost killed him. Now, he knew what he must do. To find the answer to his questions, he would look within and trust himself.
The statue turns, casting half of the sunken face in light, half in shadow. Present day, men sweep stick brooms over a marble plaza, wiping away dirty water. Others brush flower petals from a temple's exterior and remove a flower garland from a Buddha statue's neck. A woman hoses down another statue as bald monks in orange robes stride by. A barefoot monk steps lightly over the still wet marble as a title fades in, The Buddha, Part 2. A man twirls a two-sided drum, sending beads on strings back and forth to pound it. People mill about a public space. A woman sells wares set up on a blanket, and a knee-high goat wanders between legs.
Bodh Gaya is a small town in northeastern India.
A man snaps a photo of people in white posing in front of a brick temple. The temple towers above the scene like a tall, skinny pyramid.
Throngs of pilgrims have come here from all over the world for more than 16 centuries.
A pilgrim carries a statue inside a small glass case. Other statues in rings bearing a figure in a meditative pose are set out for sale. A shopkeeper plays a singing bowl. Monks in orange march in a column too wide. Pilgrims in white follow.
For Buddhists, there are hundreds of holy places, but none more sacred than this one. Bodh Gaya is the sacred point from which the Buddhist faith radiates.
Pilgrims process, holding a length of shiny gold fabric between them like they're making a parade dragon.
Some pilgrims travel great distances, reciting prayers and prostrating themselves every step of the way.
Pilgrims bow, lie prostrate, and stand, inching their way down a marble path. Others hang prayer flags.
It is their Mecca and Jerusalem.
Others sit at the base of a tree ringed in a wooden wall.
Their Holy of Holies is not the imposing temple beside them, but a simple fig tree, Ficus religiosa, the Bodhi tree.
Gnarled branches spread out from a thick trunk.
The tree, it is said, is descended from the Buddha's time. Every pilgrim knows the story of how Siddhartha, after accepting the rice milk from the young girl, put aside the rags he was wearing, bathed himself in a nearby river, and strengthened, sat down in the shade of the Bodhi tree and began to meditate.
A single leaf shaped like an acorn turns into animation.
It was springtime. The moon was full.
A carpet of leaves grows.
Before the sun would rise, Siddhartha's long search would be over.
The leaves open up to a white Siddhartha resting at the base of a black Bodhi tree.
He sat down under a Bodhi tree in the shelter of the natural world in all of its beauty and fullness. And he said, I will not move from this place until I have solved my problem.
Let my skin and sinews and bones dry up, together with all the flesh and blood of my body, he said. I welcome it. But I will not move from this spot until I have attained the supreme and final wisdom.
The fierce face of Mara bares its fangs.
All at once, Mara, Lord of Desire, rose to challenge him.
Mara's head controls the limbs of a tree. A mob of dark spirits wields torches and weapons behind him.
With an army of demons, he attacked.
Golden arrows let loose. Horned figures spread jaws wide.
Siddhartha did not move, and their weapons turned into flowers.
Arrows burst into blossoms that rain down on the white figure still cross-legged at the base of the Bodhi tree.
Mara is the ruler of this realm of desire, this world that we all live in. And what he's afraid Siddhartha is going to do when he attains enlightenment and becomes the Buddha is conquer that world. That is, he's going to do away with desire. He's going to wreck the whole game.
Now, with a muscular body, Mara unfurls his dark serpent's tongue from his mouth.
Mara did not give up.
3 women alight from his tongue and dance.
He sent his 3 daughters to seduce him.
Bare-chested and wearing arm bracelets and necklaces, the women bob their bodies seductively with pursed lips. The silhouette of Siddhartha comes to the fore.
Siddhartha remained still.
Serene and snarling visages face off.
When he faces Mara, he faces himself and his own destructive capacity. But he's not the warrior trying to do battle with those qualities. He's discovered his own capacity for equanimity. He has become like, the top of the great Himalayan mountains, The weather is passing over him, storms are raging around him, and he sits like the top of the mountain, impassive, not in a trance state, totally aware of everything.
Head down, Siddhartha's eyes remain closed.
So he frustrates Mara.
Siddhartha resisted every temptation Mara could devise. The Lord of Desire had one final test.
The god reassumes his many-limbed tree form and waves axes, arrows, and more.
He demanded to know who would testify that Siddhartha was worthy of attaining ultimate wisdom. And his demon army rose up to support him.
The dark army stretches off to the horizon.
Siddhartha said nothing. He reached down and touched the ground, and the earth shuddered.
A ripple spreads out from his fingers. The Bodhi tree blurs momentarily, and the ground beneath the demon army quakes.
Mara's demons fled.
A close-up shows Siddhartha's fingertips pointing downward.
The Buddha reaches down and with his finger touches the earth. He says, "The earth is my witness."
Poet WS Merwin.
He said, "Mara, you are not the earth. The earth is right here, beneath my finger." And the earth is what we're talking about. Accepting the earth, not owning the earth, not possessing the earth, but the earth just as it is, abused and exploited and despised and rejected and plowed and mined, spat on and everything else, it's still the earth, and we owe everything to it.
In the animation, clouds pass over the full moon. Below, the leafy Bodhi tree spreads its canopy over the meditating man.
Siddhartha meditated throughout the night. And all his former lives passed before him.
The cat morphs into the elephant becomes a butterfly, and so on.
He remembers all his previous lives, infinite numbers of previous lives. Female and male and every other race and every other being in the vast ocean of life forms.
Robert Tenzin Thurman, Columbia University.
And he remembered that all viscerally, so that means his awareness expanded so all the moments of the past were completely present to him.
He gains the power to see the process of birth, death, and rebirth that all creatures go through. He's given this sort of cosmic vision of the workings of the entire universe.
Back at the Bodhi tree, a star appears in the night sky and spreads shining rays like the points of a compass.
As the morning star appeared, he roared like a lion.
The tree's leaves become a flock of flapping birds.
My mind, he said, is at peace.
Flowers fill the air.
The heavens shook, and the Bodhi tree rained down flowers. He had become the awakened one, the Buddha.
Flower blossoms flow downward like a waterfall.